Manager called me a unqualified idiot, and insulted me, so I made sure she regret it. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glare across the open-plan office. The hum of keyboards and muted phone conversations filled the air, but for me, everything had gone eerily silent. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood there, rooted to the spot, while her words sliced through the room like a knife. "A complete waste of space," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "An unqualified idiot who doesn't deserve to be here." Her eyes bore into mine, cold and calculating, as if she were trying to break me down piece by piece. Around us, colleagues pretended not to listen, their heads buried deeper into their workstations, though I could feel their curiosity crackling beneath the surface. I had always known Margaret was difficult. She'd earned her reputation as one of the toughest managers in the company, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't constructive criticism or even tough love, it was pure malice disguised as professional feedback. Every syllable she uttered felt like a hammer blow, chipping away at what little confidence I had left after months of working under her relentless scrutiny. It had started innocuously enough, a few pointed remarks about my reports needing improvement, some passive-aggressive comments about meeting deadlines. But over time, these isolated incidents had snowballed into daily assaults on my competence and character. Today's outburst wasn't just another bad day, it was the culmination of weeks of subtle undermining and outright hostility that had worn me down to my very core. As I stood there, frozen in place, I realized how far I'd let things go. How had I allowed myself to become this person, the one shrinking under someone else's cruelty? The irony stung sharply. I joined this company full of hope and ambition, eager to prove myself in a competitive field. Now, barely 6 months later, I found myself questioning whether I belonged here at all. Margaret continued her tirade, oblivious to, or perhaps reveling in, my growing discomfort. "Do you even understand basic industry standards?" she demanded, her voice rising with each word. "Your work is amateurish at best, and frankly, we're all suffering because of your incompetence." Each accusation hit harder than the last, not because they contained any truth. I knew my work was solid, but because of the sheer force behind them. Margaret had mastered the art of making personal attacks sound like professional critiques, leaving her victims struggling to defend themselves without appearing defensive or insecure. Looking back now, I can see how carefully she'd orchestrated this moment. She'd chosen her timing perfectly, late afternoon, when the office was still bustling but most senior staff had already departed. No witnesses who mattered would hear her words, yet enough people remained to ensure maximum embarrassment. She'd positioned herself between me and the door, effectively trapping me in her verbal crossfire. What hurt most wasn't necessarily the words themselves, it was the casual cruelty with which she delivered them. There was no concern for my development, no genuine desire to improve my performance. This wasn't about making me better, it was about making me smaller. About asserting her dominance in the most brutal way possible. As she finally wound down her assault, I noticed something crucial. Despite her apparent anger, her hands weren't shaking. Her voice never wavered. This wasn't a spontaneous eruption of frustration, it was calculated, deliberate destruction. Margaret wasn't just managing up or maintaining standards, she was playing a game where the only winning move was to crush those beneath her. In that moment, standing there with my cheeks burning and my vision blurring from unshed tears, I made a decision. Not just to survive this encounter, not merely to endure until I could find another position elsewhere. No, I resolved then and there to transform this experience into something more meaningful. To take every ounce of pain and humiliation she was pouring into me and channel it into fuel for my own growth. Because as much as Margaret believed she was tearing me down, she was actually building something far stronger within me. Something she couldn't possibly comprehend. Something that would eventually make her regret every single word she'd spoken. The walk home that evening felt endless, each step heavier than the last. The city streets blurred together through my tear-streaked vision, the usual bustle of evening commuters registering only as distant echoes. I clutched my bag tightly against my chest, as if it could somehow shield me from the weight of Margaret's words still reverberating in my mind. The subway ride passed in a haze of public faces and private pain, each stop bringing me closer to the solitude I desperately needed. When I finally reached my apartment, I threw my keys onto the counter with more force than necessary. The sound startled me, breaking through the fog of humiliation that had settled over me. I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror, eyes red-rimmed, face pale, and turned away quickly, unable to bear the reflection of my defeated self. In the kitchen, I mechanically set about making tea, the familiar ritual offering some small comfort in its routine. Sinking onto the couch with my mug, I pulled my knees to my chest and let the dam break. The sobs came in waves, each one releasing years of pent-up frustration and self-doubt. For so long, I'd prided myself on being strong, on handling whatever life threw at me with grace and determination. Yet here I was, crumbling under the weight of another person's cruelty. Was Margaret right? Had I been fooling myself all along? The darkest thoughts crept in as night fell, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this career path after all. Perhaps everyone else had seen my inadequacies long before I did, and Margaret was simply brave enough to say what others only whispered behind closed doors. The memory of her sneering face haunted me, her words replaying on an endless loop in my mind. Sleep eluded me for hours as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of my colleagues, their carefully neutral expressions masking whatever they truly thought of me. Were they laughing at me now? Sharing stories about the incompetent new hire who couldn't handle basic tasks? The thought made my stomach churn with shame. Yet amidst the despair, a spark of defiance began to flicker. I remembered why I'd entered this field in the first place, the passion that had driven me through countless late nights studying, the excitement of solving complex problems, the joy of creating something meaningful from chaos. Margaret might have succeeded in making me doubt my abilities today, but she couldn't erase years of hard work and dedication overnight. By morning, exhaustion had claimed me, pulling me into a restless sleep filled with fragmented dreams. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the windows, painting patterns across my bedroom walls. As I sat up, rubbing my eyes, I realized something crucial: I hadn't quit. Despite everything, I hadn't walked away from my job yesterday. That simple fact carried more weight than I initially understood. Padding barefoot to the kitchen, I brewed another cup of tea and opened my laptop. Instead of checking work emails, I found myself scrolling through old project files, revisiting accomplishments I'd nearly forgotten in the haze of recent months. There was the marketing campaign I'd helped launch that exceeded expectations, the process improvements I'd implemented that saved the team hours each week, the client presentation I'd nailed despite having only days to prepare. With each discovery, my perspective shifted slightly. Margaret's words hadn't changed these facts, they were still valid achievements, regardless of her opinion. The realization didn't erase the pain, but it created space for something new, a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as worthless as she'd claimed. That afternoon, I called Sarah, my oldest friend from college. We met at our favorite cafe, where the comforting aroma of freshly ground coffee and baked goods wrapped around us like a warm embrace. Through tears and laughter, I poured out everything, every insult, every moment of self-doubt, every fear about my future. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You know what this reminds me of?" she asked gently when I finally ran out of words. "Remember that professor who failed you on that paper sophomore year? The one who said you'd never make it in this field?" I nodded, remembering the sting of that grade and the harsh comments scrawled across my paper in red ink. At the time, I'd wanted to drop out altogether. "And what happened after that?" Sarah pressed. I smiled despite myself. "I worked twice as hard on the next paper. Got an A+ and proved him wrong." "Exactly," Sarah said, leaning forward earnestly. "This is just another version of that story. Only this time, you're older, wiser, and have way more resources to draw from. You've faced worse than Margaret before, and you've always come out stronger." Her words struck a chord deep within me. Yes, this situation felt devastating now, but it wasn't the first time I'd encountered professional adversity. Each previous challenge had taught me valuable lessons, forced me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. Why should this be any different? As we parted ways later that evening, Sarah handed me a small notebook she'd picked up at a stationery store nearby. "Start writing down everything you accomplish," she advised. "Every task completed, every positive comment from clients or colleagues, every successful project. Build your own evidence against Margaret's lies." Back home, I opened the notebook and stared at the blank pages. Then slowly, deliberately, I began filling them. With each entry, I felt a tiny bit of power returning to me. Margaret might control my work environment, but she couldn't dictate how I viewed myself, not anymore. The following weeks became a delicate dance of survival and strategy. Each morning, I arrived at the office determined to maintain a professional demeanor, no matter what Margaret threw my way. I learned to anticipate her moods, recognizing the subtle signs that preceded her tirades, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the way she tapped her pen against her desk, the almost imperceptible tightening of her jaw. These observations became my early warning system, allowing me to mentally prepare for the storms ahead. I developed coping mechanisms that kept me grounded during her attacks. Beneath the conference room table, my fingers traced patterns on my knee, an anchor to reality while her words battered me above. I practiced deep breathing techniques, focusing on inhaling strength and exhaling doubt. Most importantly, I began documenting everything, every interaction, every project milestone, every achievement, no matter how small. The notebook Sarah had given me transformed into a detailed record of my professional life, a bulwark against Margaret's attempts to rewrite history. Colleagues noticed the change in me. Where once I might have crumbled under criticism, now I responded with calm professionalism. "Actually, Margaret," I found myself saying during one particularly heated meeting, "the data shows that approach increased efficiency by 15%. Here are the metrics." Her shocked expression was worth every moment of preparation. I sought allies strategically, cultivating relationships with key players across departments. Mark from IT became a crucial supporter, helping me streamline processes and implement technical solutions that enhanced our team's productivity. Rachel in marketing collaborated with me on several successful campaigns, her enthusiasm infectious and encouraging. Even Margaret's assistant, Claire, proved invaluable, quietly warning me about upcoming meetings where Margaret planned to ambush me. These alliances weren't just about protection, they provided opportunities for growth. Through Mark, I gained technical skills that expanded my capabilities beyond my immediate role. Rachel's mentorship improved my presentation skills and strategic thinking. Claire's insider knowledge helped me navigate the political landscape of the office more effectively. My evenings transformed into dedicated learning sessions. Online courses replaced aimless social media scrolling, books on leadership and emotional intelligence crowded my nightstand, and podcasts featuring industry leaders accompanied my commutes. Each new skill acquired, each concept mastered, built another layer of armor against Margaret's attacks. The more knowledgeable I became, the less intimidating her criticisms seemed. I also invested in my physical and mental well-being. Morning runs cleared my mind and boosted my energy levels, while meditation sessions helped manage stress. A therapist helped me process the emotional impact of Margaret's behavior, teaching me techniques to reframe negative thoughts and build resilience. These practices created a foundation of strength that supported me through the most challenging days. Professional development workshops became regular fixtures in my calendar. I volunteered for cross-departmental projects, seeking exposure to different aspects of the business. Each new experience added depth to my understanding of the company and broadened my network of contacts. I attended industry conferences, not just as a participant but as a contributor, sharing insights and learning from others in my field. Most significantly, I began mentoring junior staff members. Helping others develop their skills and confidence provided unexpected healing for my own wounds. Seeing their growth reminded me of my own journey and reinforced my belief in my abilities. The gratitude in their eyes became a mirror reflecting back my value, countering Margaret's attempts to diminish it. Through it all, I maintained meticulous records of my achievements. Detailed reports documented project outcomes, client testimonials verified success stories, and performance metrics tracked progress. These weren't just defenses against potential future conflicts, they were building blocks for something greater. Each entry in my notebook represented not just a victory but a step toward reclaiming my professional identity from Margaret's toxic influence. As months passed, the transformation became undeniable. Colleagues who once avoided eye contact during Margaret's outbursts now offered supportive smiles. Team members sought my advice on projects outside my direct responsibilities. Even executives from other departments began acknowledging my contributions during company-wide meetings. Margaret's power over me was eroding, replaced by a growing respect and recognition from others. The turning point came unexpectedly during a high-stakes client presentation. Margaret had insisted on taking the lead, despite my intimate knowledge of the project's details. As she stumbled through technical aspects, misrepresenting key data points, I watched the client's expression shift from interest to confusion. When they began asking questions that exposed gaps in her understanding, I stepped in smoothly, providing clear, accurate explanations that restored their confidence. The client's subsequent praise, "We really appreciate your expertise and attention to detail," landed like a thunderclap in the conference room. Margaret's face flushed crimson, but she couldn't dispute the evidence before her. From that moment forward, I noticed a subtle shift in her behavior. The public humiliations became less frequent, replaced by increasingly desperate attempts to claim credit for my successes. Meanwhile, my network of support continued to expand. Senior management began inviting me to strategy meetings, valuing my insights and data-driven approaches. Cross-departmental initiatives I led demonstrated measurable improvements in efficiency and profitability. The professional development investments I'd made started paying dividends, positioning me as a thought leader within the organization. Particularly gratifying was the emergence of unexpected allies among Margaret's former favorites. Several colleagues who had once distanced themselves during her attacks now actively sought my collaboration. Their private confessions revealed that Margaret's tactics had affected them too, though they'd lacked the courage to acknowledge it earlier. Together, we formed a quiet coalition of resistance, supporting each other's growth and subtly undermining her divisive influence. My mentoring activities blossomed into formal leadership development programs, endorsed by HR after witnessing their impact on junior staff retention and performance. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret's attempts to destroy me had inadvertently created a platform for empowering others. Watching Mentz thrive and advance filled me with a sense of purpose that transcended mere professional success. The documentation of my achievements evolved into a comprehensive portfolio, showcasing my capabilities and contributions. Regular updates to my resume and LinkedIn profile reflected not just job responsibilities but tangible results and recognized expertise. Industry publications began accepting my articles on innovative approaches to workplace challenges, further establishing my reputation beyond company walls. Most tellingly, Margaret's attempts to undermine me grew increasingly transparent and ineffective. Her criticisms sounded hollow against the backdrop of consistent positive feedback from clients, colleagues, and superiors. The metrics spoke for themselves. Projects I led consistently outperformed expectations, teams I managed showed improved morale and productivity, and initiatives I championed delivered measurable value to the organization. During executive reviews, my name appeared more frequently in discussions about high-potential employees and future leadership opportunities. While Margaret clung to outdated methods and authoritarian management styles, I embraced collaborative approaches and adaptive strategies that aligned with modern business practices. The contrast became impossible to ignore, even for those who had previously dismissed my capabilities. Perhaps the most satisfying development was watching how my transformation influenced organizational culture. Other employees began speaking up about inappropriate management practices, emboldened by my example. HR policies evolved to address toxic workplace behaviors, partly informed by the documentation I'd maintained throughout my ordeal. What had started as a personal battle against Margaret's tyranny was blossoming into a movement for systemic change within the company. As I prepared for the annual company retreat, where top performers would present their achievements to the entire organization, I realized something profound. Margaret's insults had indeed changed me, but not in the way she intended. They hadn't broken me, they'd forged me into someone stronger, more resilient, and more capable than I ever imagined possible. The woman standing before the mirror, reviewing presentation notes with confident anticipation, bore little resemblance to the uncertain young professional who had once crumbled under Margaret's attacks. The retreat venue buzzed with anticipation as executives and department heads mingled during the pre-presentation reception. I moved through the crowd with newfound assurance, exchanging greetings with colleagues who now regarded me with respect rather than sympathy. The transformation in their attitudes mirrored my own journey, from victim to victor, from target to trailblazer. As I finalized preparations backstage, I couldn't help but notice Margaret lingering near the entrance, her usual commanding presence diminished by uncertainty. For the first time, I saw cracks in her carefully constructed facade, the slight hesitation in her step, the nervous adjustment of her blazer, the fleeting glances toward the stage where I would soon present. These subtle signs of vulnerability fueled my resolve, not with malice but with purpose. The moment arrived, and I stepped into the spotlight, greeted by the expectant faces of hundreds of colleagues and executives. As I began my presentation, outlining the innovative strategies and measurable successes achieved through collaboration and authentic leadership, I felt a profound sense of vindication. Each slide projected on the massive screen behind me told a story of resilience and redemption, of challenges overcome and barriers broken. The audience's response was electric. Heads nodded in agreement, phones captured slides for future reference, and pens scribbled notes with urgency. During the Q&A session, questions poured in from every corner of the room, executives seeking implementation details, department heads requesting collaboration opportunities, junior staff asking for mentorship advice. The energy in the room crackled with possibility, and I knew I was experiencing something far greater than personal triumph. From the corner of my eye, I noticed Margaret retreating from the room, her departure marked by a palpable shift in atmosphere. Yet rather than feeling satisfaction at her discomfort, I felt something unexpected: compassion. Watching her leave, I understood that her behavior stemmed from insecurities and fears far deeper than anything she'd projected onto me. This realization didn't excuse her actions but offered a path toward closure that transcended simple revenge. As the presentation concluded and applause filled the auditorium, several senior executives approached me with offers of expanded responsibilities and leadership opportunities. The CEO himself expressed interest in implementing some of my proposed initiatives company-wide. Yet amid these professional victories, my thoughts kept returning to Margaret's empty chair and the complicated emotions surrounding her absence. That evening, as I reflected on the day's events in my hotel room, I realized the true measure of my success wasn't in proving Margaret wrong, it was in proving myself right. The journey had transformed me into a leader who could inspire others, effect meaningful change, and maintain integrity in the face of adversity. The question now wasn't about how far I'd come, but rather, how much farther could I go, and who else could I bring along with me?